In the Northern Territories, the law was as old and unyielding as the mountains. The Moon Law, decreed by the Alpha Council of Elders, was clear. Alphas ruled by strength and bloodline, betas served and enforced. Omegas were bound. When the fated bond manifested, it was seen as the divine will of the old gods. The council verified it, certified it, and the Omega was transferred to their Alpha's care, willing or not. To reject the bond meant exile. To fight it often meant death. Virgin Omegas were the most dangerous of all. Rare, coveted, they were whispered to carry dormant ancient bloodlines, powers that had once balanced the Alpha's strength but were now hunted to near extinction by those who feared what they could not control. The council managed them with ruthless precision, using them as political currency or locking them away. Lysander Thorn had resisted their machinations for years. You need a mate, the elders had insisted. The bloodline must continue. The North needs an heir. He had refused, not out of defiance alone, but out of a deep-seated horror. He had seen the bond turn good alphas into possessive tyrants. He had watched the light fade from Omega's eyes as they became mere ornaments, their wills subsumed. He had sworn he would never be that, never reduce another person to a puppet of fate. Now, fate had laughed in his face and delivered Ilara Vale. An hour later, in the austere council chamber, 5 faces watched him with varying degrees of calculation. Elder Torvin, the head of the council's northern seat, stroked his long silver beard. "Your Grace, we understand you have taken an unusual guest under your wing, a virgin Omega of unknown origin, found in your private solar, no less." Lysander took his seat at the head of the black granite table, his expression carved from ice. "I have offered sanctuary to a summoned guest who was left to wander my halls unattended. A breach of security and courtesy I will be addressing." "A breach, indeed," Elder Celine, her voice like silk over steel, interjected. "The guards report a certain intensity in the encounter. The bond, perhaps." "If a bond has manifested," Lysander cut her off, his words precise and cold, "it will be examined through the proper channels at the proper time. Until any such verification, Ilara Vale is under my protection. She will not be questioned, examined, or approached by this council without my direct consent." The elders exchanged glances. Torvin leaned forward. "Your Grace, the Moon Law is explicit. If the bond is real, she must be prepared for the ceremony of binding. Her bloodline must be tested for stability. There are protocols." "There are my orders." Lysander dropped his voice into that space of pure alpha dominance that made the very air pressure change. He let it fill the room. Let the lesser alphas at the table feel the weight of his will. "Do you understand?" A tense silence fell. Finally, Torvin gave a stiff nod. "Of course, Your Grace." But as Lysander left the chamber, the look in Torvin's eyes was not one of obedience. It was one of cold, patient strategy. Lysander had drawn a line in the snow, and he had just made Ilara the prize on the other side of it. Ilara's new room was in the highest tower, a circular space with windows that showed a breathtaking, terrifying view of the endless white mountains. A fire burned, and furs were piled high on a bed bigger than her entire cottage. It should have felt safe. It felt like a gilded cage. She couldn't sleep. The bond was a live wire in her chest, buzzing with a foreign energy that pulled her constantly to the center of the citadel, toward him. She felt adrift, uprooted. She had spent 23 years being no one, and now, suddenly, she was the most important nobody in the North. A soft knock at the door broke her spiraling thoughts. The guard outside, Mara, a beta woman with kind eyes, had discreetly stepped away. When Ilara opened the door, Lysander Thorn stood there. He had shed his formal cloak and crown. He looked younger and infinitely more weary. "I shouldn't be here," he said, his voice quieter than she'd heard it. "It breaks every rule, but I had to. I needed to know you were truly settled, that you felt safe." His concern, so at odds with the powerful sovereign from the stories, disarmed her. "I am. Thank you. The protection, I know I don't deserve such notice." "You deserve more than notice," he said, the words fierce. Then he caught himself, reining in the emotion. "I apologize. The bond, it is louder than I anticipated." She stepped back, holding the door open, an invitation fraught with risk. He crossed the threshold. They didn't sit on the chairs. They ended up on the thick furs by the hearth, the stone floor cold beneath them. It felt less formal, less like king and subject. "Does it hurt?" Ilara asked softly, gazing at the space where his crown had been. He let out a slow breath, a crack in his regal armor. "Every day. But a king cannot show the strain. Weakness is a luxury the North cannot afford." "I don't think honesty is weakness." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw not a king, but a man burdened by a destiny he never chose. "The council would disagree with you." The silence that followed was comfortable, filled only by the fire's song. She was acutely aware of the few feet between them, a space that seemed to hum with the energy of the bond. "Can I ask you something?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Anything. Why was I summoned? What could the Alpha Sovereign possibly want with me?" Lysander's stormy eyes darkened. "I didn't summon you, Ilara. The message you received, it bore my seal?" She nodded. "Then it came from the council. They must have sensed something, known something about you. Perhaps they suspected a dormant bloodline. Perhaps they wanted to control you before—" He stopped, but the unspoken words hung in the air. "Before the bond could find you, before you could find me." The bitterness rose in her throat, sharp and cold. "So I was bait, or a test, and now the bond has, what, ruined their plans?" "It has complicated everything," he admitted. "For them, for me, for you." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Ilara, the moon law says the bond is absolute, that once verified, you have no choice. You would be bound to me, whether you wished it or not." She hugged her knees to her chest, the enormity of it crushing. "I've spent my whole life belonging to no one. The strange girl with the pale hair. I was content in my obscurity. I don't know how to be property, even a king's property." The raw honesty of her words seemed to startle him. "I am terrified of that," he confessed, the admission shocking in its vulnerability. "I have seen what the bond does. I have seen the light fade from Omega's eyes as they became mere ornaments, their wills subsumed. I had sworn I would never be that, never reduce another person to a puppet of fate. Me either." The strange understanding bloomed between them, there on the fur-strewn floor. "Then what if we made a choice?" Ilara said, the idea forming as she spoke. "Before the council forces one on us, what if we decided, together, what this connection means, what it doesn't?" Lysander looked at her, a spark of something like hope ignited in his storm-gray eyes. "You would consider that, even knowing the danger, knowing what I am, what the crown demands?" "You are the first person," Ilara said, her voice gaining strength, "who has ever asked me what I want instead of telling me what I should be. That means something." A small, genuine smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines. "You are unlike anyone I had ever known, Ilara Vale. Is that good or bad?" "It is terrifying," he said. "And it is the most real thing that has happened to me in years." For a long moment, they simply sat in the firelight, two souls adrift in a storm of destiny, finding an unexpected calm in each other's honesty. The bond hummed between them, not as a chain, but as a question. And then the door exploded inward. Splinters of ancient oak rained down as the door shattered. 3 figures clad in shadows and slate-gray leather surged into the room, moving with a silent, lethal grace that spoke of professional killers. Their faces were obscured by plain cloth masks, but their eyes were flat and cold. Assassins. Time seemed to warp. Alara saw the lead assassin's blade, a cruel, curved thing, aimed not at the king, but at her. She was frozen, a deer in the path of a wolf. Lysander moved with impossible speed. He didn't go for a weapon. There was none to grab. He became a wall of muscle and fury, throwing himself in front of her. The blade meant for her heart sank into the meat of his shoulder with a sickening thud. A roar of pure rage tore from Lysander's throat, a sound so deeply alpha it shook the stones. He grabbed the assassin's wrist, twisting with brutal force until bones snapped. The man screamed, the blade falling from nerveless fingers. Chaos erupted. The other two assassins lunged. Captain Rylan and guards poured into the room from the corridor, swords drawn. The clash of steel was deafening in the confined space. But Alara saw none of it. Her world had narrowed to the dark bloom of blood spreading across Lysander's tunic, to the grimace of pain on his face as he shoved her behind him, using his good arm to fend off an attack with a dagger wrested from the first assassin. No! The word was ripped from her, not in fear, but in a fury that burned through the shock. This man, this king who had spoken of fear and choice, was bleeding for her. The bond, that nebulous connection, erupted into a white-hot scream of protective rage. It wasn't a thought, it was an instinct older than the citadel itself. A pressure built in her chest, a gathering storm. Silver light, faint at first, then blinding, erupted from her skin. It wasn't a flash, it was a sustained pulse, pushing out from her in a wave. The two advancing assassins were thrown backward as if struck by a giant's hand, slamming into the stone wall with bone-jarring force. The light coalesced behind her, taking form, not a solid wolf, but the shimmering, majestic ghost of one, massive and silent, its eyes glowing with her same silver fire. It stood over her and Lysander, a spectral guardian from a forgotten age. The fighting stopped. Everyone in the room, guards, assassins, the king, stared, stunned into stillness. The ghost wolf turned its luminous gaze on the assassins. It made no sound, but a wave of primal, icy fear radiated from it. The masked men scrambled to their feet, their courage broken. They fled back through the shattered doorway, dragging their unconscious leader, disappearing into the dark maze of the citadel. As quickly as it appeared, the silver light faded. The ghost wolf dissolved into motes of shimmering dust. The energy left Alara in a rush, and her knees buckled. Lysander caught her before she hit the ground, his wounded shoulder forgotten, his arms cradling her with a ferocious gentleness. "Alara!" His voice was a harsh whisper, laced with pain and awe. "By the gods!" Captain Rylan was at his side. "Your Grace, your wound." "Forget the wound," Lysander snarled, his eyes never leaving Alara's pale face. "Who were they? How did they get in here?" "Not Citadel guards," grimly said Rylan, examining a dropped blade. "Professional knives. No markings." He looked from Alara to his king, his expression unreadable. They were here for her. The implications hung in the air, colder than the mountain wind whistling through the broken door. The council had moved faster than Lysander anticipated. This wasn't just a political play anymore. This was an execution order. Lysander's face hardened into something terrifying. "Mara, secure this floor. Triple the guard. No one comes up here without my personal seal. Rylan, have my healer attend us here, and summon the Master of Keys. I want to know every hidden passage, every forgotten tunnel in this fortress. They came from inside." He looked down at Alara, who was trembling in his arms, not from cold, but from the aftershock of power she never knew she possessed. "You're safe," he murmured, though the words felt hollow. Nowhere was safe. Her power, her very existence, had just made her the ultimate target. The healer, an elderly beta named Kalen, worked efficiently, stitching Lysander's shoulder with hands that didn't shake. Alara sat wrapped in a fur by the fire, a cup of medicinal tea untouched in her hands. She watched the blood being cleaned away, the proof of how close it had been. The old blood, Kalen muttered as he worked, glancing at Alara with a mix of reverence and fear. It's been generations since a guardian manifested. The texts say it only awakens in defense of a true bond, or under threat of annihilation. What does that mean? Alara asked, her voice small. It means, child, Kalen said, tying off the last stitch, that you carry the legacy of the Omega Sovereigns, the ones who ruled with the Alphas, not beneath them. The Council's ancestors wiped that line out centuries ago. They called it a purification. I call it a massacre. He packed his tools away, avoiding Lysander's piercing gaze. If they even suspect what you are, they will not stop with assassins. After Kalen left, the room was heavy with silence. Lysander paced before the fire, his movements stiff with pain and tension. He's right, Lysander finally said. This changes everything. Torvin and the elders, they don't just want to control a bond, they want to erase a threat to their entire power structure. You are a living reminder that their version of history is a lie. Alara stood, the fur falling from her shoulders. Then what do we do? I can't stay locked in this tower forever, and you can't fight a shadow war while bleeding from an assassin's blade. We do what we should have done from the start, Lysander said, stopping his pacing to face her. We verify the bond ourselves. Alara blinked. How? There is an ancient rite, older than the Moon Law, the veracity of souls. It doesn't require council elders or blood tests. It requires only truth, will, and a place where the old gods still listen. The Whispering Grove. It's a day's hard ride from here, deep in the Blackwood. If we go there, and the bond is true, the Grove will confirm it in a way even the council cannot deny. And if it is not, he hesitated. If it is not true, the Grove will reveal that too. This was a gamble, a dangerous journey through hostile territory to a place of ancient magic. And if the council catches us before we get there? Lysander's smile was sharp, a predator's grin. Then we let them try. But we won't be going as the Sovereign and his captive Omega. We'll be going as two people seeking the truth, a truth they are desperately afraid of. He walked to a heavy chest against the wall, opening it to reveal not jewels, but practical, worn traveling gear. We leave tonight, under the cover of this chaos. Rylan and Mara will cover our absence. But you must understand, Alara, once we step into that forest, there is no going back to what we were. The truth, whatever it is, will change everything. Alara looked at the travel clothes, then at the man offering her not just protection, but partnership in a quest for truth. The ghost wolf's powers still tingled in her veins, a silent confirmation of the ancient legacy she carried. She was tired of being a pawn, a target, a question mark. She met his stormy gaze, her silver eyes gleaming with a resolve that surprised them both. Then let's go find our truth. They left Silverfane's citadel like thieves in their own home, dressed in dark, nondescript wool and leather, faces shadowed by deep hoods. They slipped through a postern gate known only to the Sovereign and his most trusted captain. The cold night air was a slap, cleansing away the scent of blood and fear. Lysander moved with a hunter's silence, his wound seemingly forgotten, his senses stretched to their limits. Alara followed, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, every shadow a potential assassin. They met Captain Rylan at the edge of the stables, where two sturdy, unremarkable mountain horses stood ready, their breath steaming in the dark. The watch has been rotated to men I trust, Rylan murmured, his voice low. The story is a collapsed section in the North Tower requiring the Sovereign's immediate inspection. It should buy you a day, perhaps two. After that, he didn't need to finish. He handed Lysander a worn pack. Supplies, a map, and this. He passed over a slender, unadorned blade in a plain sheath. For her. Lysander nodded, a world of understanding passing between the two men. Hold the citadel, Rylan. No one enters my solar. No one. On my life, your grace. With a final glance at the fortress that was both prison and throne, Lysander helped Alara mount, then swung up onto his own horse. They melted into the pre-dawn gloom, following a little-used hunter's trail that wound down the mountain. The black wood earned its name. By the time full daylight filtered through the dense, twisted canopy, the world had transformed into a twilight realm of grays and deep greens. Ancient pines groaned in the wind, and a deep, primeval silence pressed in on them, broken only by the crunch of hooves on frost and the occasional distant cry of a raven. It was a place outside of time, outside of laws. Alara had never been so far from anything familiar. The scale of the wilderness was overwhelming, yet a strange peace settled over her. Here, she wasn't the pale-haired Omega or the Sovereign's dilemma. She was just a traveler. The bond, too, felt different, less like a tether pulling her toward a specific person, and more like a warm, steady pulse connecting her to the living, breathing man riding beside her. She could feel his alertness, his constant scanning of the trees, the faint echo of pain from his shoulder. It wasn't intrusive, it was simply there. A shared awareness. They rode in comfortable silence for hours until Lysander guided them to a small, clear stream to water the horses. As Alara stretched her stiff legs, she finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the ghost wolf appeared. What did Kaelin mean, Omega Sovereigns? Lysander crouched by the stream, splashing icy water on his face. He was silent for a long moment, as if choosing his words carefully. The history the council teaches is a careful edit, he began, his voice low. They say the moon law has always been, that alphas have always ruled by right of strength, but older tales, the ones told in secret by firesides, speak of a different time, a time of balance. He looked at her, his gray eyes serious. They say the first rulers of the North were pairs, an alpha and an omega, bound not by force, but by a bond of true partnership. The alpha brought strength, strategy, the power to protect. The omega brought wisdom, connection to the land and the old gods, a power of spirit and guardianship. They ruled together. The guardian spirit, what you manifested, was the mark of that omega line. It was a power of protection, of healing, of truth. He stood, his expression grim. But power corrupts. Some alphas grew greedy. They didn't want partners. They wanted subjects. They began to see the Omega's power not as a gift, but as a threat to their absolute control. A movement grew. They called it the purification. They claimed the old gods had decreed alphas as sole rulers. They hunted down the Omega Sovereigns, killed them, and erased them from the records. The moon law was written to ensure no Omega could ever rise to such power again. The bond, which was once a sacred partnership, was twisted into a tool of ownership. The story settled over Alara like a shroud. It explained so much, the council's fear, their instant hostility, her own strange connection to something greater. And the Whispering Grove? It is one of the last places sacred to the old ways, a place where the veil between worlds is thin. If the bond between us is of the old kind, a partnership, a choice, the Grove will recognize it. If it is merely the forced connection the council enforces, it will remain silent. Or so the legends say. You're risking your throne on a legend, Alara said, not accusingly, but in wonder. I am risking my throne on the chance that the legend is truth, and that you are the key to restoring it. Before she could respond, Lysander got rigid, his head snapped up, his nostrils flaring. Get down, he hissed, his voice barely audible. He didn't wait for her to obey. In one fluid motion he was at her side, pulling her and the horses into the thick cover of a rocky overhang draped with frozen brambles. He clamped a hand over her mouth, his eyes locked on the trail ahead. Seconds later, they heard it, the soft, rhythmic crunch of careful footsteps. Not horses, men, moving with purpose. Through a gap in the brambles, Alara saw them, 5 figures, dressed in forest camouflage, their movements efficient and silent. They weren't assassins in masks, these were trackers, scouts, and leading them, his keen eyes scanning the ground, was a man Alara recognized from the citadel, Elder Torvin's personal huntsman, a beta named Vorlin. Her blood ran cold. The council hadn't just sent assassins to kill, they'd sent hunters to find. The trackers paused barely 20 feet from their hiding place. Vorlin knelt, examining the soft earth by the stream. He pointed to the fresh hoofprints, then to the crushed frost where Alara had stood moments before. He looked directly toward their rocky shelter. Lysander's grip on her tightened. His other hand went to the hilt of his sword. They were outnumbered, and a fight would reveal their location to any other parties in the area. It was a terrible choice: fight and risk everything, or stay hidden and pray they leave. Vorlin took a step toward them, and then, from the deep woods to the west, came the long, mournful howl of a true timber wolf. It was answered by another, then another, until a chorus seemed to surround the small clearing. The trackers froze, their professional calm breaking into unease. Wolves in a pack were a formidable danger, even for armed men. Vorlin cast one last frustrated look at the rocky overhang, then signaled to his men. Silently, they melted back onto the trail, heading in the direction of the howls, drawn away by the more immediate threat. Lysander and Alara didn't move until the sounds of the forest swallowed the tracker's retreat. Finally, he released her, his breath a slow, controlled exhale. "That wasn't an accident," Alara whispered, her eyes wide. "The Blackwood is listening," Lysander said simply, "and it seems it favors an omega of the old blood. We must move. They will circle back." They remounted, pushing the horses to a faster pace, leaving the stream behind. The encounter had shattered the fragile peace of the journey. The council's reach was longer than they'd hoped. The race to the Whispering Grove had just become a desperate sprint for truth, with hunters closing in from behind. They rode until the horses were lathered and the light began to fail, the forest growing even darker and more tangled. The map became useless in the labyrinth of ancient trees. Lysander finally stopped at the base of a giant, lightning-blasted oak that split into 3 massive trunks. "We go on foot here," he said with a hushed reverence. "The grove does not suffer the presence of iron-shod beasts or the pride of riders." They secured the horses in a small, hidden hollow, leaving them with feed and water. The silence here was profound, a living thing that pressed against Alara's ears. The very air felt charged, like before a thunderstorm, but sweeter, older. The bond between them hummed with a new intensity, not pulling, but resonating with the energy of the place. Lysander led the way, following no path she could see, yet moving with a certainty that spoke of instinct or perhaps a guidance she couldn't perceive. The undergrowth thinned, replaced by soft moss and strange bioluminescent fungi that cast an eerie blue-green glow. The trees grew wider, their bark silver-white and smooth, their branches intertwining high above to form a cathedral ceiling. And then they entered the Whispering Grove.
It was a circular clearing, perhaps 100 paces across, perfectly level. In its center stood a ring of 7 monoliths, stones of pure quartz that glowed with a soft, internal moonlight despite the deepening gloom. A pool of perfectly still, black water reflected the stones and the first stars pricking the violet sky about the canopy. But the most striking feature was the sound. It was a soft, susurrating murmur, like 1,000 distant voices speaking secrets just below the threshold of hearing. The whispers seemed to come from the stones, the water, the very air. Alara felt a wave of dizziness, a sense of profound recognition. She had never been here, yet her soul knew this place. The silver light within her stirred, responding to the ancient song of the grove. Lysander stopped at the edge of the stone circle, his face pale in the ethereal light. He looked afraid, not of physical danger, but of the judgment to come. "This is it," he said, his voice barely disturbing the whispers. "The veracity of souls. We must step into the circle, stand before the heartstone." He pointed to the central, largest monolith. "And we must speak the truth of what is between us. The grove will respond." "What if it rejects us?" Alara asked, her own fear a cold knot in her stomach. "Then the bond is a lie of the moon law, and we will know." He looked at her, his stormy eyes vulnerable. "And I will ensure you have your freedom, Alara, no matter the cost to me." His promise, spoken here in this sacred place, felt more binding than any council decree. She nodded, unable to speak. Together, they stepped between two of the quartz monoliths. The moment they crossed the threshold, the whispering grew louder, coalescing into words that brushed against their minds, not in their language, but in the language of pure feeling. "Approach." They walked to the heartstone. Up close, it was translucent, and within its depths, swirls of silver and gold light moved like captive galaxies. Lysander took a deep breath. "I am Lysander of House Thorn, Alpha Sovereign of the Northern Territories," he said. His voice rang clear in the hushed space. "I come before the old gods and the memory of the balance. I speak of the connection I feel to this Omega, Alara Vale." He turned to her, and the formality fell away. "I feel a pull toward her that defies reason, a need to protect her, to stand beside her. But more than that, I feel a respect for her strength, a wonder at her spirit. I fear the bond, for I have seen its corruption. But what I feel for Alara is not a desire to own. It is a desire to walk the same path. If this is the will of the gods, let it be a partnership, or let it be nothing." The whispers swirled around his words, testing them. The light in the heartstone pulsed. It was her turn. Alara's mouth was dry. She looked into the swirling depths of the stone, then at the man beside her, who had taken a blade for her, who had given up his throne for a chance at truth. "I am Alara Vale. I am an Omega with no house, no legacy but the one I carry unknowingly in my blood." She placed her hand over her heart. "I feel the pull to him. It is a song I did not ask for. But in the silence between the notes of that song, I have found something else. I have found a man who sees me, who asks instead of commands, who fears his own power more than he covets mine." She turned to face Lysander fully, her silver eyes glowing with reflected light. "What I feel is not obligation. It is not fear of the law. It is trust. It is the choice to stand with someone even when the world says I must kneel. If this is a bond, let it be one of choice. Let it be true." As her last word faded, the whispering grove fell utterly silent. The murmurs ceased. The very wind held its breath. Then the heartstone erupted with light. Not a blinding flash, but a gentle, radiant wave of gold and silver that flowed outwards, washing over both of them. Alara gasped as she felt the light seep into her skin, warm and affirming. The ghostly image of the silver wolf materialized beside her, not as a protector, but as a companion, its form more solid, more real than before. It nuzzled her hand, then turned its great head and touched its muzzle to Lysander's wounded shoulder. Where it made contact, the freshly stitched skin glowed for a moment, and when the light faded, the wound was gone. Not healed, erased, as if it had never been. Simultaneously from Lysander, a new form emerged, a massive spectral wolf of storm gray in shadow, its eyes glowing like banked coals. The Alpha Spirit. It stood shoulder to shoulder with Alara's silver guardian. They did not clash. They mirrored each other, balanced. The two spirits looked at their human counterparts, then bowed their great heads once before dissolving back into the light, which now swirled around Lysander and Alara, weaving them together in a tapestry of shimmering energy. Alara felt the bond solidify, not as a chain, but as a bridge. She could feel Lysander's awe, his relief, his profound, humbled joy as clearly as her own. They were connected, but the connection was open, respectful, a link between two whole souls, not the domination of one over the other. The light slowly receded, sinking back into the heartstone and the monoliths. The whispers returned, but they were no longer questioning, they were approving, a chorus of ancient, gentle voices. The balance is remembered. The choice is validated. The bond of the old way is reaffirmed. Lysander reached out, his hand hovering near hers, not grabbing, offering. Alara slid her hand into his. The contact sent a jolt of pure, clean energy through them both, the final seal on the truth the grove had revealed. They were bonded, but they were free. The triumph was short-lived. As the last of the grove's light faded, a new, harsher light pierced the clearing, torchlight, and the sound of many feet crashing through the undergrowth. From the tree line, Elder Torvin stepped into the edge of the clearing, flanked by Vorlin and a dozen armed council guards. His face, illuminated by the torch flames, was a mask of cold fury and triumph. How poetic! The runaway sovereign and the mutant Omega seeking validation from dead gods in a forgotten grove. He raised a hand. The guards leveled crossbows. You are both under arrest for treason against the Moon Law and the abdication of royal duty. The Omega will be taken for containment and study. The Alpha, the smile was thin and cruel, will be taken to face the judgment of the full council of elders. Seize them. The hunters had found their prey, and in the sacred grove that had just blessed their bond, Alara and Lysander found themselves surrounded, the truth they had fought for seemingly meaningless against the cold steel of the council's will. Rough hands grabbed Alara, wrenching her away from Lysander. She cried out, not in pain, but in protest as the newly forged bridge between them strained under the violent separation. Lysander roared, a sound of pure alpha fury, and for a moment the guards holding him staggered back. The storm-gray wolf spirit flickered around him, a promise of violence. "Stand down, Lysander," Torvin barked, stepping forward with a smug authority, "or I will give the order to put a bolt through her heart right here. Your ancient spirits cannot stop cold iron moving at speed." The threat was a physical blow. Lysander froze, the spectral energy dying around him, his eyes wild with helpless rage as he met her terrified gaze. He was sovereign, but here, outnumbered and with her life as the bargaining chip, he was powerless. "Wise," Torvin sneered. "Bind him, specially treated silverite cuffs for our gifted king." Guards produced manacles that gleamed with a sinister, dull silver light. The moment they clasped around Lysander's wrists, he gasped, his strength visibly leaching away. Silverite suppressed alpha power, a tool of control the council reserved for the most dangerous.
Alara was bound with ordinary ropes, but a guard forced a bitter-tasting liquid down her throat, a suppressant. Immediately, the comforting hum of her own power, the connection to the silver wolf, faded into a distant whisper, muted and out of reach. She felt hollow, cold, and terrifyingly alone. The journey back was a nightmare. They were forced onto separate horses, surrounded by a grim phalanx of guards. Torvin rode at the front, victorious. The Blackwood, which had felt like an ally, now seemed a gloomy accomplice to their capture. They did not return to Silverfang's citadel. Instead, the procession turned northeast, towards the jagged peaks known as the Razor's Teeth. There, carved into the side of a mountain, was the Eyrie, the high prison and stronghold of the Alpha Council. It was a place of cold justice and colder politics, where dissenters vanished. Ilara was dragged down winding, torchlit stairs deep into the mountain's heart. The air grew dank and still. They threw her into a cell not of bars, but of solid, rune-carved stone with a single, high, slit-like window. The door was a slab of iron. The suppressant in her veins made her feel heavy and numb. She slumped against the wall, the despair complete. Hours, or maybe days later, the door clanked open. Elder Celine entered, followed by a severe-looking woman in healer's robes. Celine looked around the cell with distaste, as if the very stones offended her. Ilara Vale, or should I say the last remnant of a thankfully extinct line. Celine's voice was clinical. The Grove's little light show was impressive, a parlor trick of recessive genes and suggestion, but it changes nothing. The moon law is the law of the land, not the superstition of a forest. The Grove showed the truth, Ilara said, her voice raspy from disuse. The bond of the old way, a partnership. Celine laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Partnership, child. You are a vessel, a potentially unstable vessel of dangerous, archaic power. Our ancestors cleansed the land of your kind for a reason. Your power is chaotic, uncontrollable. It upsets the natural order. The healer stepped forward, holding a cruel-looking crystal prism on a chain. We must assess the stability of your bloodline for the safety of the realm. She reached for Ilara. Don't touch me, Ilara recoiled, but the suppressants made her movements sluggish. Hold her, Celine ordered a guard. The examination was not medical. It was invasive, a violation of mind and spirit. The healer used the prism, which glowed with a harsh white light, scanning Ilara's body while muttering incantations. Ilara felt her muted power being probed, measured, and catalogued like a specimen. It was a profound violation, worse than any physical pain. After an eternity, the healer stepped back, her face grim. The power is deep, and it is bonded, intertwined with the sovereign's alpha essence in a way I've never seen. It is not a master-servant link. It is symmetrical. Celine's eyes narrowed. Can it be severed? Purged? To sever it would likely kill them both. The connection is fundamental. To purge the power from her, the healer shook her head. It would be like draining the ocean with a cup. The source is not just in her. It is in the bond itself and in the legacy she carries. It is a part of her soul. Celine's lips tightened into a thin line. Then she is even more dangerous than we thought, a living conduit to a past we have buried, and he is infected by it. She turned to leave. Keep her sedated. We will convene the full council to decide their fate. The options are containment or termination. The iron door sealed shut, plunging Ilara back into darkness in the echo of that final chilling word, termination. Meanwhile, in a cell several levels above, Lysander paced like a caged wolf, the silverite cuffs burning against his skin, dampening his strength but not his fury. He could feel Ilara's distress through the bond, a constant, dull ache of fear and violation. It fueled his rage, but the cuffs turned his potent alpha commands into useless growls. His door opened, not Torvin or Celine, but an unexpected visitor, Captain Rylan, still in his travel-stained clothes, his face grim. "Rylan!" Lysander surged forward, hope flaring. "How?" "Mara," Rylan said quickly, his voice low. "She has certain talents. She created a distraction at the main gate. I don't have much time." He produced a small, intricate key from his belt. "This will release one cuff, only one. It's all I could get. The other, the mechanism is warded. You'll have some of your strength back, but not all." He swiftly unlocked Lysander's right manacle. The relief was immediate, like a limb coming back to life. Power, though muted, flowed back into him. Ilara is in the oubliette, level 7, heavily guarded. The council meets at dawn to pass sentence. You must get her out tonight. "The Citadel?" Lysander asked, flexing his freed hand. "Holding, but loyalties are fraying with you absent and declared a traitor. Torvin's faction is gaining ground. You need more than an escape, Your Grace. You need a victory. You need to show the North the truth." Lysander gripped his captain's shoulder. "You risk everything." Rylan met his gaze steadily.
I serve the true North, the one you and that girl in the dungeon represent. Now go. Mara's distraction won't last." He slipped back into the corridor. Lysander was alone again, but no longer powerless. He had one free hand, a sliver of his strength, and a bond that hummed with his mate's terror. Dawn was coming, and with it, a death sentence. He looked at the remaining silverite manacle on his left wrist, then at the solid stone wall of his cell. A plan, desperate and reckless, began to form. He wouldn't just escape, he would break into the heart of the Eyrie itself, and he would show the council what happened when they caged not just an Alpha King, but one half of a bond of the old way. The Eyrie was a maze of stone and shadow, but Lysander knew its basic layout from strategic briefings. More importantly, he could feel Elara. The bond was a compass needle pointing relentlessly downward, a cold, pulsing knot of fear in the mountain's belly. The suppressants they'd given her were weakening, enough for the connection to sing its mournful tune. He moved like the ghost of a wolf, using the returned fraction of his alpha abilities to muffle sound, to sense guards around corners before they sensed him. The silverite on his left waist was a dead weight, a constant drain, but the fury in his heart was a stronger fuel. He disarmed 2 guards with silent, efficient blows, taking a dagger and a short sword. The weapons felt like extensions of his will. Level 7, the oubliette, was the oldest part of the Eyrie. The air was thick with mildew and despair. 2 guards stood before a rune-carved iron door. They never saw him coming. A pommel to the temple, a precise pressure point strike, and they slumped to the floor. Lysander took the heavy keyring from the belt of one. The key turned with a scream of protesting metal. He shoved the door open.
Elara was curled in a corner, shivering in the damp cold. She looked up, her silver eyes widening in disbelief as he filled the doorway, backlit by the corridor torch. For a moment, they just stared, the bond surging between them, flooding with relief and desperate hope. "Lysander!" His name was a prayer on her lips. He was at her side in 2 strides, his free hand cupping her face. "I'm here. Can you walk?" She nodded, pushing herself up, though she was weak from the suppressants and confinement. He sliced through her ropes with a dagger. The moment her bonds fell away, she felt a spark, her own power, struggling against a chemical fog. It was faint, but it was there. "The council meets at dawn," he said, helping her steady herself. "We're not sneaking out. We're walking out through the front hall." Elara stared at him. "There'll be hundreds of guards between us and the gate." A grim, determined smile touched his lips. "Let them try." He held up his manacled wrist. "This silverite dampens my power, but our bond, Lara, the grove confirmed it's a circuit, a balance." He took her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. "I need you to try. Try to reach for your power. Not to fight, just to connect, to complete the circuit." She understood. Closing her eyes, she pushed past the sluggishness, past the fear, reaching for the core of silver light within her. It was like trying to lift a mountain, but then she felt his strength flowing into her through their joined hands, not dominating, but supporting. His alpha essence, steadfast and fierce, braced her own, and she found it, a tiny, defiant flame of silver fire. The moment her power ignited, something extraordinary happened. The silverite manacle on Lysander's wrist glowed red-hot, then white-hot. With a sharp crack, the warded mechanism shattered, and the manacle fell away, clattering on the stone floor. Power, pure and unadulterated, roared back into Lysander, not just his own, but power amplified, refined by the connection to her. His storm-gray eyes flashed with lightning, and beside him, Elara's silver light grew brighter, steadier. The ghost wolf appeared at her side, no longer faint, but solid and shimmering. From Lysander, his own alpha spirit wolf manifested, larger and more defined than ever before. They were 2 halves of a whole, and together, their power was geometric. "Stay close to me," Lysander said, his voice resonating with new authority. He picked up the short sword. Elara kept hold of his other hand, her own power a protective cloak around them both. They didn't run, they walked.
out of the oubliette corridor and into the main thoroughfares of the Eyrie. Alarms began to sound, shouts, clanging bells. Guards poured into the passages ahead. The first squadron took one look at the sovereign with eyes of storm and lightning, the Omega glowing with spectral light and a silver wolf at her shoulder, and hesitated. "Stand aside." Lysander's voice was a rolling peal of thunder, infused with a command that was no longer just Alpha, but something older. "By the truth of the Whispering Grove and the bond of the old way, I am your rightful sovereign. This woman is my fated queen. Those who stand with the corrupt council stand against the true North." Some guards lowered their weapons, confusion and ancient superstition warring on their faces. Others, loyal to Torvin, charged. What followed was not a battle, it was a declaration. Lysander moved with impossible speed and grace, his sword a blur, deflecting blows without killing, using the flat of the blade to disarm and disable. Ilara's role was different. Her silver wolf would interpose itself between Lysander and an attack, absorbing the blow with its luminous form. She focused her will not on offense, but on protection. She pushed waves of calming energy towards the attacking guards, not to control them, but to shatter their battle frenzy, to make them see the truth of what they were attacking. They moved as one unit, a dance of perfect synergy. He was the unbreakable shield and the unstoppable force. She was the immovable object and the compassionate heart. Guard after guard fell back, not from wounds, but from awe, from the sheer, undeniable rightness of the power flowing between the two figures walking calmly through their stronghold. Word spread like wildfire through the Eyrie. The sovereign has broken free, the Omega spirit walks, the old ways have returned. They reached the grand antechamber, the vast hall just before the main gates, and there, waiting with a full contingent of his most loyal guards, was Elder Torvin. His face was purple with rage. "Heretics! Abominations! You desecrate our laws with this performance! Kill them! Now!" The final contingent charged. This was the core of Torvin's power, fanatical and unafraid. Lysander and Ilara stopped. They looked at each other, a world of understanding passing in a glance. This was the moment. They had to show more than power. They had to show the balance. Dropping his sword, Lysander simply raised his hands. Ilara mirrored him. They stood, exposed before the onslaught. And then they let their combined power sing. It wasn't an attack, it was a revelation. A sphere of intertwined light erupted from them, silver and storm gray, swirling together in perfect harmony. It expanded in a wave, passing through the charging guards, through Torvin, through the very stones of the Eyrie. Where it touched, weapons fell from numb hands. Anger dissolved into confusion, then into a profound, stunned peace. Guards looked at each other, at Torvin, at the radiant couple in the center of the hall, and saw not monsters, but sovereigns, true ones. Torvin alone remained enraged, sputtering against the wave of calming truth. "Heretics! Witchcraft!" But their guards did not move. They knelt, one by one. Then in groups, they went to their knees not in submission to dominance, but in recognition of something they hadn't known they were missing. The massive main gates of the Eyrie, barred from the outside, began to groan. Then, with a sound of shearing metal, they blew inward, torn from their hinges by a force from the outside. Standing in the ruined gateway, flanked by Captain Rylan, Mara, and what looked like the entire garrison of Silverfang Citadel, was a figure Ilara never expected to see. Kalen, the old healer. In his hands he held not a medical kit, but a staff carved with runes that glowed with the same silver light as her own. "The balance returns." Kalen's voice, amplified by magic or sheer conviction, echoed through the hall. "The Council of Elders is dissolved by the will of the true sovereigns and the authority of the old gods. Lay down your arms." The last resistance crumbled. Torvin alone stood surrounded by his kneeling men, facing the united force of the Citadel guards and the radiant power of Lysander and Ilara. His rebellion was over, defeated not by swords, but by truth. Lysander stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the hall. The purification
ends today. The lie is over. The North remembers its true heart." He turned and held his hand out to Ilara. She took it, and together they walked through the kneeling soldiers, past the broken gates, and into the first light of dawn breaking over the razor's teeth. They had not just escaped, they had reclaimed their kingdom. The return to Silverfang's citadel felt different to Ilara. The people who lined the icy roads didn't just cheer for their victorious Alpha King, who rode beside her. They stared in wonder at the pale-haired Omega who rode beside him, her head high, a quiet, steady light still lingering in her silver eyes. The story of the escape from the Eyrie, of the twin spirits, and
Ilara was curled in a corner, shivering in the damp cold. She looked up, her silver eyes widening in disbelief as he filled the doorway, backlit by the corridor torch. For a moment, they just stared, the bond surging between them, flooding with relief and desperate hope. "Lysander!" His name was a prayer on her lips. He was at her side in 2 strides, his free hand cupping her face. "I'm here. Can you walk?" She nodded, pushing herself up, though she was weak from the suppressants and confinement. He sliced through her ropes with a dagger. The moment her bonds fell away, she felt a spark, her own power, struggling against a chemical fog. It was faint, but it was there. "The council meets at dawn," he said, helping her steady herself. "We're not sneaking out. We're walking out through the front hall." Ilara stared at him. "There'll be hundreds of guards between us and the gate." A grim, determined smile touched his lips. "Let them try." He held up his manacled wrist. "This silverite dampens my power, but our bond, Lara, the grove confirmed it's a circuit, a balance." He took her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. "I need you to try. Try to reach for your power. Not to fight, just to connect, to complete the circuit." She understood. Closing her eyes, she pushed past the sluggishness, past the fear, reaching for the core of silver light within her. It was like trying to lift a mountain, but then she felt his strength flowing into her through their joined hands, not dominating, but supporting. His alpha essence, steadfast and fierce, braced her own, and she found it, a tiny, defiant flame of silver fire. The moment her power ignited, something extraordinary happened. The silverite manacle on Lysander's wrist glowed red-hot, then white-hot. With a sharp crack, the warded mechanism shattered, and the manacle fell away, clattering on the stone floor. Power, pure and unadulterated, roared back into Lysander, not just his own, but power amplified, refined by the connection to her. The first week was a whirlwind. Lysander spent hours each day with Rylan and the remaining loyal commanders, dismantling the council's apparatus. The Moon Law was officially repealed, its scrolls burned in the central courtyard in a symbolic funeral pyre for the old ways. In its place, Lysander began drafting the Accords of Balance, a new set of laws based on the principles verified in the Whispering Grove: consent, partnership, and the intrinsic value of all designations. Ilara, meanwhile, found herself in a new role. She was no longer a hidden guest or a prisoner. Omegas from the Citadel and surrounding villages began to seek her out. Tentatively at first, then in growing numbers, they came with stories of oppression, of bonds they never wanted, of lives controlled by alphas who saw them as property. They came for hope. She started holding informal councils in the garden courtyard, the one place that felt like home. She listened. She didn't have all the answers, but she had empathy, and she had the unshakable proof that another way was possible. Kaelin, the healer, became an unexpected advisor, teaching her the fragments of history and lore that the council had tried to erase. Her power, the Silver Guardian, was not just for protection, he explained. It was a power of empathy, of healing deep wounds, of seeing truth. She began to practice, tentatively learning to guide it, to use it to soothe not just physical pain, but the scars of fear and subjugation. One afternoon, she found Lysander in his solar. Their solar, as he now insisted,
poring over maps. He looked up as she entered, and the weary lines on his face softened. "How are the gardens?" "Overflowing," she said with a small smile, sitting opposite him. "An Omega from the Ironwood pack came today. Her alpha mate died last winter, and the pack alpha was trying to force her into a new bond with his son. She ran here. She heard there was a queen who would understand." Lysander's jaw tightened. "What did you tell her?" "I told her she is under the protection of the crown, that no one can force her. And I had Mara assign her a place in the Weavers' Guild, where she can earn her keep with her skill, not her designation." Ilara met his gaze. "It's a small thing, but it's a start." "It's everything," he said quietly. He pushed the maps aside. "The Accords are ready for a public reading, but they need both of our names on them. They need to be presented not by a king, but by the sovereigns, partners." Ilara's breath caught. "Lysander, I have no royal blood, no training." "You have the blood of the Omega sovereigns, which is older and truer than any royal line in the north," he said firmly. "And you have a wisdom I lack. You see people, not subjects. The Accords need that heart." He reached across the table, his hand open. "I won't force this on you, Ilara. That would betray everything we're trying to build. This is another choice. Will you stand with me, not as a bound mate, but as a co-ruler, as my queen?" The question hung in the air, weightier than any bond. This was not about fate. This was about faith. Faith in her, in them, in the new north they could build together. She looked at his open hand, then into his storm-gray eyes, and saw not a king demanding loyalty, but a man offering his shared future. The bond between them hummed a quiet, supportive chord. She placed her hand in his. Yes. The coronation was unlike any in history. It was held not in the austere throne room, but in the great courtyard, under the open sky. Every Omega, Beta, and Alpha who could make the journey was invited. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant, hard blue. Lysander stood on a raised platform, dressed in the gray and black of House Thorn, but without the heavy crown of domination. Instead, he wore a simple circlet of wrought iron and frost sapphire. Beside him stood Ilara, in a gown the color of winter moonlight, her pale hair loose around her shoulders. Captain Rylan, representing the military, and Kaelin, representing the keepers of the old ways, stood before them. Rylan held the Accords of Balance on a pillow of wolf fur. Lysander's voice carried over the silent, snow-dusted crowd. "For centuries, we have lived a lie. We believed strength was only in dominance. We believed destiny was a chain. Today, we end that lie." He picked up the first scroll. "By this accord, no bond shall be recognized without the free and informed consent of both parties. By this accord, the rights of personhood, to property, to safety, to choice, are granted to all, regardless of designation. By this accord, the rule of the North returns to the ancient principle of balance." As he read each tenet, a cheer rose from the crowd, especially the Omegas gathered at the front, their faces alight with tears and disbelief. Then it was Ilara's turn. Kaelin stepped forward, holding not a crown, but a delicate diadem of intertwined silver and iron, set with a single luminous moonstone. The crown of the Omega sovereigns, lost to time, remade for a new age. Do you, Ilara of the Veil, accept the mantle of queen to rule with wisdom, compassion, and unwavering dedication to the truth of the balance? Ilara looked out at the sea of faces, at the hope shining in eyes that had only ever known fear. She saw Lysander beside her, not as her anchor, but as her equal counterpart. She felt the silver light within her, not as a weapon or a secret, but as a gift to be used for good. "I do," she said, her voice clear and strong. Kaelin placed the diadem on her head.
The moment it settled, a soft silver light emanated from the moonstone, and her guardian wolf manifested briefly behind her, not in threat, but in benediction, its form clear and beautiful to all. A collective gasp of awe swept the courtyard. Lysander took her hand again, lifting it high with his. Behold your sovereigns, not by force, but by choice, not by law, but by love for this land and its people. The roar that erupted shook the very foundations of Silverfang. It was the sound of a people unchained, of a new beginning. That night, in the quiet of their chamber, the diadem and circlet resting side by side on a table, Ilara and Lysander stood at the window, looking out at their sleeping kingdom. The bond between them was a quiet, deep river of mutual respect and affection. "The moon didn't bind us," Lysander whispered, his forehead touching her temple in their now customary gesture. Ilara smiled, leaning into him. "We did." The future was uncertain. Old enemies like Torvin were imprisoned, but his ideology still had echoes in distant pacts. The work of building the balance would be the work of a lifetime. But as they stood together, hand in hand, watching the first stars appear over the mountains, they knew they faced it not as prisoner and king, or even as Alpha and Omega. They faced it as partners, as sovereigns, and as two people who had chosen each other against all odds, and in doing so, had chosen freedom for an entire nation.
5 years later, the first light of the spring solstice dawned over Silverfang, painting the peaks in rose and gold. In the courtyard, now permanently open to the people, a young boy with hair of dark oak and eyes of stormy gray was trying to coax a silvery, shimmering puppy, a smaller, playful version of the guardian spirit, to fetch a stick. The puppy, all bright energy and affection, would phase in and out of visibility, much to the boy's delight. From a balcony above, Ilara watched, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. The legacy of the old blood was secure, not as a weapon, but as a gift passed down in joy. Her son, Eric, was the first child born of a bond of choice, celebrated by the whole North. Lysander came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her and resting his hands over hers. "He has your smile," he murmured. "And your stubbornness," she replied, leaning back into his warmth. Below, Eric finally convinced the spirit pup to play, their laughter echoing up the stone walls. The citadel was no longer a fortress of dominance. It was a home. The accords of balance were law, and while the transition wasn't always smooth, a new generation was growing up with its principles as their foundation. Omega scholars taught in the new schools, beta artisans led guilds. Alphas learned that true strength was in stewardship, not subjugation. Kaelin, older and frailer but with eyes still bright, had established a hall of history, ensuring the true past, both the glory of the balance and the darkness of the purification, would never be forgotten. The North was at peace, a hard-won, vigilant peace, but peace nonetheless. Ilara turned in Lysander's arms, her silver eyes meeting his gray ones. No words were needed. The bond between them, 5 years strong, was a deep, quiet well of understanding, love, and shared purpose. They had faced shadows and hunters, cages and councils, and they had chosen each other through all of it. He kissed her forehead, the gesture filled with a reverence that had only grown with time. "The moon didn't bind us," he whispered the old, cherished words. She smiled, the expression holding all the joy and peace of their hard-fought future. "We did." And in the courtyard below, under the dawning sun of a new era, the laughter of a free child and his loyal spirit echoed the truth of their choice, a promise for all the dawns to come. The end.